The room went silent. The sound of laughter died at once. Every guest froze, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding in the middle of the mansion. The woman in the red dress stood tall, her face full of pride, her hands gripping the front of the maid's uniform. Then, with one sharp pull, the sound of tearing cloth filled the air. The young black maid gasped, her trembling hands trying to cover herself as the fabric fell apart. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. Not a word came out of her mouth. Around her, people whispered, hiding behind their glasses of wine. No one stepped forward. And at the head of the long table sat the billionaire, James Whitmore. His face was calm but heavy, his eyes fixed on the woman he had been set up with for the night, the same woman who had just humiliated the person who had kept his home spotless for years. The candles flickered, the music stopped, and the silence became heavy, painful. Then slowly, James pushed back his chair and stood up. No one knew what he was about to do, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next would change every life in that room forever. Hours earlier, the mansion had been alive with soft light and expensive perfume. James had agreed, after much persuasion, to host a Halloween dinner arranged by his business partner. The idea was simple: to meet Vanessa Blake, a wealthy socialite who everyone believed was perfect for him. But for James, the night already felt wrong. He had not celebrated Halloween in 5 years. His wife, Clara, had died in an accident on that very night. Since then, he banned every pumpkin, every mask, and every reason to smile. But tonight, his living room was filled with fake laughter and glowing lanterns, all for a woman he barely knew. Nancy Wilson, the maid, had spent the entire day cleaning and preparing for this dinner. Her back ached, her hands smelled of lemon polish, yet her smile never faded. She lived in a small apartment with her sick mother, and though she barely made enough to survive, she always gave her best. When James entered the hall that evening, he noticed her right away. She was carefully arranging glasses, adjusting the candlelight so it wasn't too harsh. He paused for a moment, watching her. There was something peaceful about the way she worked, something that reminded him of simpler times. "Good evening, sir," Nancy said softly without looking up. "Good evening," James replied, his voice low. "You've done well." "Thank you, sir," she said, smiling gently. It had been a long time since he'd noticed a smile that felt real. Moments later, the main doors opened, and Vanessa Blake arrived. The sound of her heels echoed across the marble floor. She wore a tight red gown that shimmered under the chandelier, her perfume heavy in the air. She walked straight toward James with a confident smile. "You must be James," she said. "Finally we meet." He nodded politely and offered her a seat. Vanessa's eyes scanned the room, admiring everything, but when they fell on Nancy, her expression changed. It was subtle at first, a small frown, a hint of annoyance. As the dinner began, the guests laughed and talked, but James remained quiet. Every now and then, he would glance toward Nancy as she served food, making sure she wasn't overworked. At one point, he even asked softly, "Nancy, have you eaten?" The question drew quick glances from the table. A billionaire asking his maid if she had eaten was not something people heard every day. Nancy smiled awkwardly and said, "I will after everyone's served, sir." Vanessa laughed, tilting her glass of wine. "You're too kind, James. These people know their jobs, don't they?" Nancy lowered her eyes and walked away quietly. By the time dessert was served, Vanessa had grown bolder. She leaned closer to James, speaking loud enough for others to hear. "You know, sometimes you have to remind people of their place. Kindness makes them forget who's in charge." James didn't respond. His face remained calm, but his silence carried a warning. Still, Vanessa smirked and reached for her glass of wine. It happened in seconds. As Nancy passed behind her with a tray, Vanessa turned suddenly and accidentally spilled wine all over her uniform. The deep red stain spread quickly across the navy blue fabric. "Oh dear," Vanessa said sarcastically, her voice full of false concern. "You should learn how to serve properly." Gasps filled the room. Nancy stood frozen, her cheeks wet with silent tears. She tried to apologize, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It was my fault." Vanessa's eyes gleamed with cruelty. "Your fault? Let me help you remember your place." Before anyone could react, she grabbed the front of Nancy's uniform and ripped it open. The sound of the cloth tearing echoed across the hall. The tray dropped, glasses shattered, and the room fell dead silent. Nancy stood still, clutching the torn fabric to her chest, her breath unsteady. The humiliation burned deeper than the sting of the torn cloth. Every pair of eyes in the room looked at her, but no one moved. At the far end of the table, James slowly rose from his chair. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. The silence grew heavier. Even Vanessa's smile faded a little as she watched him walk toward them. Nancy trembled, unsure what would happen next. The guests held their breath. James stopped just a few steps away, his voice calm but deep. "Enough," he said. Vanessa blinked. "James, I was just—" He raised his hand gently. Not another word. The entire room waited for what came next, but the look on his face said it all. And in that moment, everyone realized the billionaire they thought was heartless was about to do something no one expected. The guests sat frozen, afraid to breathe. You could almost hear the sound of Nancy's tears falling onto the marble floor. Her hands shook as she tried to hold the torn fabric against her chest. The air in the mansion had grown thick, heavy, almost painful to breathe. James Whitmore stood in silence, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. For years, people had feared his silence, but tonight it felt different. There was anger in it, but there was also something else, disappointment. He took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on Vanessa Blake. The woman who had walked into his home with pride now stood speechless. Her face lost color as she tried to explain herself. "James, it was just a misunderstanding," she said nervously, brushing her hair back. "I didn't mean to—" "Stop," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the air. "You didn't mean to? You ripped her uniform in front of everyone, and you call that a misunderstanding?" No one spoke. Some guests lowered their eyes, pretending to fix their napkins. Others looked at Nancy, ashamed of their own silence. James reached for his jacket and walked toward the trembling maid. He stopped in front of her, his voice calm and gentle. "Nancy, please," he said softly. "Let me help you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I'm fine," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're not fine." He placed the jacket gently over her shoulders, helping her cover herself. For a moment, the room felt still, like time had paused to watch. The billionaire, who had once built walls around his heart, was now standing up for someone society had taught him to ignore. He turned to the crowd. "If this is what wealth has made people become, then I'd rather eat alone," he said firmly. His words echoed through the hall. "There is no class in cruelty." Vanessa's lips trembled. "James, you're overreacting. She's just a maid." James turned his gaze toward her, his eyes calm but sharp. "Just a maid? The same maid who makes sure this house stays standing? The same maid who works night and day so people like you can sit here and feel powerful? If you think kindness makes someone less, then maybe you should rethink what you call power." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She felt the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on her. "I think you should leave," James said quietly. Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied. Leave my house." Vanessa's face twisted in anger. She grabbed her purse, muttering under her breath, and stormed out of the hall. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, fading away into the silence she left behind. James looked around the room. "The dinner is over," he said. "Please, everyone, leave." No one argued. One by one, the guests stood, avoiding his eyes as they made their way toward the exit. Within minutes, the hall that once echoed with laughter was quiet again. When the last guest left, James turned to Nancy. She was still standing where he had covered her, her eyes lowered, her body shaking slightly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said softly. She wiped her tears quickly and shook her head. "Please don't apologize, sir. It wasn't your fault. I'm just thankful you stood up for me." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Still, it happened under my roof. I should have seen it coming. People like her think they can buy everything, even respect." Nancy looked at him, her voice trembling. "People like her will never understand what it means to have nothing and still smile." He met her eyes for a moment, and something inside him shifted. There was pain in her words, the kind he understood. For years, he had locked his grief behind walls of money and silence, but hearing her speak made those walls crack. "Do you have a way home?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, sir. The bus still runs till midnight." "I'll have my driver take you," he said firmly. "Sir, that's not necessary," she replied quickly, clutching the jacket close. "I don't want to cause more trouble." "You're not causing trouble," he said gently. "You've done enough for one night. Please, let me do this." Nancy hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly, something he hadn't done in years. "You should rest. Tomorrow, take the morning off." She blinked, surprised. "But there's so much cleaning to do after tonight." "Leave it," he said quietly. "I don't want you to step foot in that hall until I have all the decorations removed. I shouldn't have agreed to this dinner in the first place." She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she just held the jacket tighter and whispered, "Good night, sir." "Good night, Nancy," he said softly. She walked slowly toward the door, her steps quiet against the floor. The mansion felt heavy again, not because of the silence, but because of what lingered in it, a mix of shame, sorrow, and something new neither of them could name. When she was gone, James stood alone in the middle of the hall. His eyes drifted toward the broken glass on the floor, the wine stains on the rug, the fallen candles. Everything around him looked perfect from a distance, but up close it was chaos, just like his life. He walked to the window and looked out into the dark night. For the first time in 5 years, he saw a group of children walking down the street in costumes, holding bags of candy, their laughter soft and innocent. His chest tightened. That laughter used to fill his home once until Halloween became the day he lost everything. Tonight, it had taken a maid's tears to remind him what humanity really meant. And deep inside, he knew his story with Nancy Wilson was only beginning.
The morning after the dinner felt heavy inside the Whitmore mansion. The soft hum of the city outside could barely be heard through the tall windows. Every hallway looked clean, every surface polished, yet there was a strange silence that made the house feel empty. Nancy Wilson arrived quietly at her usual time, though her heart still carried the shame of the night before. She had washed the billionaire's jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a small paper bag. She didn't plan to stay long. When she walked through the front door, she half expected to see Vanessa Blake sitting there, pretending nothing had happened. But the house was still. The only sound came from the clock ticking above the fireplace. Mrs. Green, the housekeeper, looked up when she entered. "Nancy, you shouldn't be here," she said softly. "Mr. Whitmore told everyone you could rest today." I just came to return his jacket," Nancy replied, forcing a small smile. "It doesn't feel right to keep it." Mrs. Green nodded, her eyes kind. "He was angry last night. I've never seen him like that. You should have seen the way he looked at that woman before she left. It scared everyone." Nancy lowered her eyes. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," the woman said gently. "You reminded him that he still has a heart." Nancy didn't know what to say, so she just smiled faintly and continued toward the study. Inside, James Whitmore sat by the large window, staring at the trees outside. He hadn't slept much. The image of Nancy standing in that torn uniform haunted his thoughts. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her trembling hands, her quiet tears, the way she tried to hide her shame. He had seen cruelty before, in business, in society, even in himself. But that moment was different. It wasn't about money or power. It was about dignity, something no one should ever lose. When he heard a soft knock at the door, he turned. "Come in." Nancy stepped inside, holding the paper bag close to her chest. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly. "Good morning," he replied, his voice tired but gentle. She walked forward slowly and placed the bag on the desk. "I came to return your jacket. I washed and pressed it. I hope it's fine." James looked at the bag, then at her. "You didn't have to do that." "She wanted to," she said. "It helped me forget everything that happened for a little while." He nodded slowly. "I should be the one thanking you, Nancy." She frowned slightly. "Thanking me? For what, sir?" "For reminding me that being rich doesn't mean being right," he said softly. "Last night I saw the kind of person I never want to become again." Nancy's throat tightened. She looked down, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. "You did the right thing, sir. That's what matters." James stood and walked closer, his voice gentle. "Are you hurt? Did she scratch you when she grabbed you?" Nancy shook her head. "Just my pride, sir, but I'll be fine." He sighed. "Pride is not something anyone should have to lose, especially not in my house." There was a long pause. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of the curtains. Then James said softly, "Nancy, how long have you been working here?" 5 years, sir, since before your wife passed away." He nodded, remembering. "You were always quiet, always respectful. I never really asked about your life outside this house. Where do you live?" She hesitated. "In a small apartment near the bus station, sir. I stay there with my mother. She's been sick for a while, so I work as much as I can to keep up with her hospital bills." James studied her face. There was no self-pity in her voice, just honesty. "You've been doing all this alone?" She nodded. "Yes, sir, but God has been kind. I still have work, and she still has life. That's enough for me." Something inside him softened. For years he had measured his worth by profits, numbers, and success. But this woman, standing in front of him with nothing but kindness, made all of that feel small. He took a breath. "Nancy, I'd like to visit your mother, if you don't mind." She looked up quickly, shocked. "Sir, you don't have to do that." "I want to," he said, "if it's all right with you." Her lips trembled. "She would be honored, sir. She always prays for the people I work for." He smiled faintly. "Then I'd like to meet her." That afternoon, his driver pulled up outside a narrow apartment building on the quieter side of town. Nancy stood by the doorway, waiting nervously. When James stepped out, heads turned. It wasn't every day a billionaire walked into that neighborhood. Inside, her mother, Mrs. Wilson, lay on a small bed by the window. Her breathing was weak,
but her smile was warm. "You must be Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, taking off his coat politely. "It's good to finally meet you." "I've heard a lot about you," she said with a faint laugh. "My daughter says you're a strict man, but a fair one." James smiled slightly. "She gives me too much credit." As they talked, he saw the truth of Nancy's life. The peeling paint, the dim light, the smell of medicine in the air. Yet there was peace in that room, a kind of love money couldn't buy. Before leaving, he placed an envelope quietly on the table. "For her treatment," he said when Nancy tried to refuse. "Don't say no, Nancy, please." Her eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I can't repay this." "You already have," he said softly, "by teaching me that some hearts are richer than any bank account." When he walked out of that apartment, he didn't look back. But for the first time in years, James Whitmore felt something inside him come alive, something he thought was buried with his wife. And deep down, Nancy knew her life was about to change forever.
2 weeks had passed since that night, yet the memory of it still lingered in Nancy's mind like a shadow that refused to fade. The humiliation, the fear, the silence, all of it returned every time she closed her eyes. But what surprised her most was how kind James had been ever since. He no longer spoke to her like a distant employer. He asked about her mother's health, reminded her to eat, and often brought home small things she never expected. Flowers for her mother, fruits, medicine, and sometimes even books for Nancy herself. The mansion, which once felt too quiet, was slowly changing. Every morning, sunlight now filled the hallways instead of that dim, gray light she used to see. James had begun to open the windows again. He had ordered the staff to remove all the dark curtains that had covered the room since his wife's death. The air inside the house was fresher, lighter, almost peaceful. Still, Nancy found herself walking on careful steps, unsure where she truly stood. She respected him deeply, but part of her heart was afraid. She had seen too many people lose everything after trusting kindness that wasn't meant for them. One evening, she was arranging the flowers in the living room when James walked in, dressed in a plain white shirt and dark trousers. He looked different, not like the powerful CEO everyone feared, but like a man who had finally found calm after years of storm. "How's your mother today?" he asked gently. "She's better, sir," Nancy replied, smiling faintly. "The new treatment is working. She can sit up now without help." "That's good to hear," he said, walking closer. "I'm glad she's getting stronger." Nancy nodded, then hesitated. "Sir, I never got to thank you properly for what you did, for the hospital bills, the medicine, everything. You didn't have to do all that for us." He smiled softly. "I did it because it was right, Nancy. You've given this house life again. The least I could do was return the kindness." Her eyes lowered. "I just do my job, sir." "No, you do more than that. You bring peace. This house hadn't known peace in a long time." His words caught him off guard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt different, soft, warm, almost tender. Then James cleared his throat. "Nancy, may I ask you something?" "Of course, sir." He looked thoughtful. "Do you believe people can start over, even after losing everything?" She paused, her fingers still holding a flower stem. "Yes, sir. I believe anyone can start again if their heart still beats. Pain doesn't end a life, it just changes how we live it." James smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's lived through a lot." She gave a small nod. "Everyone carries something, sir. Some just hide it better." He didn't say anything for a while. His eyes drifted toward the window, where the evening sun painted the sky orange. His wife used to say something like that, he said quietly. She loved Halloween. Every year she'd turn this place into a house full of laughter and lights. But after the accident, I couldn't bear it. I thought shutting the world out would keep the pain away. Nancy's voice was soft. Sometimes shutting the world out only makes the pain louder. He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time he saw something familiar. The same strength his wife once had, the same warmth. That night, after the rest of the staff had gone home, James sat in his study staring at an old photograph of his wife holding a pumpkin lantern. Her laughter seemed alive in the picture. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel angry looking at it. He felt thankful. The next morning, when Nancy arrived, she stopped at the doorway in shock. The mansion looked different. The hallway was filled with orange lights and tiny paper pumpkins. Small lanterns hung by the stairs, and on the table stood a bowl of candy. James came down the stairs, his smile calm and quiet. "I thought maybe it was time to let Halloween back in," he said. "What do you think?" Nancy's eyes filled with emotion. "Sir, are you sure? You said you never wanted." "I said that because I was afraid, but last night I realized something. My wife loved this day because it brought people together. I've been alone long enough." She smiled softly. "It looks beautiful, sir. She would have loved this." He nodded. "I hope so. And Nancy, I'd like you to stay tonight, to help give out candy to the neighborhood kids. I want laughter in this house again." Nancy hesitated, then smiled. "If that's what you want, sir, I'll stay." That evening, as the sun went down, the mansion glowed with orange lights. Children from nearby houses ran to the gate, their costumes bright and full of joy. James stood by the doorway, handing out candy with a gentle smile. Beside him, Nancy helped the children reach the bowls, laughing softly as they thanked her. For the first time in 5 years, James Whitmore laughed too. Not the kind that people use to fill silence. A real one, full of life. When the last child left, Nancy stood quietly, watching him. "It feels different," she said softly. "Peaceful." James looked at her. "It feels alive again." The wind outside carried the faint sound of children's laughter down the street. Inside, the mansion felt warm, full of light. As they stood there, surrounded by soft lantern glow, neither of them spoke another word. They didn't need to. Something had shifted quietly between them, something fragile and real. For the first time in years, both of them felt they had found something they didn't know they were missing. A reason to smile again. And somewhere deep in his heart, James knew that this was only the beginning of a new kind of healing. The next morning came with soft rain falling against the windows. The sky was gray, but the mansion still glowed with traces of the Halloween lights from the night before. The laughter from the children had faded, but the warmth that left behind stayed in every corner of the house. Nancy moved quietly through the living room, tidying up the candy wrappers and small paper pumpkins scattered on the floor. She smiled to herself. It had been years since she'd heard real laughter inside that house, and knowing she was part of it made her heart feel full. As she bent to pick up a fallen lantern, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw James standing there, dressed casually, holding 2 cups of coffee. His smile was calm. "You were here early," he said. "Did you even rest?" "I woke up before sunrise. It's hard to sleep when you feel peace for the first time in a long while." He handed her one of the cups. "Then we share that feeling." She accepted it, surprised. "Thank you, sir." They stood there in silence for a moment, sipping the warm drink while listening to the rain. It was simple, quiet, and peaceful, something neither of them had felt in years. James finally spoke. "You know, when I agreed to host that dinner, I thought I was doing it just to please my business partners. But now I realized it was meant to teach me something. Sometimes pain brings people into our lives for a reason. Nancy looked at him gently. Sometimes pain is just the door God uses to show us kindness again. He nodded slowly. You've shown me that, Nancy. She lowered her gaze, feeling shy. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw me when everyone else looked past me. That means more than you'll ever know. James set his cup on the table. I didn't see you before. Not really. I saw what I wanted to see. Just another worker, just another day. But that night when Vanessa tore your uniform, something inside me broke. I realized I had been just as blind in my own way. Nancy's hands trembled slightly. You don't owe me anything for that night, sir. He smiled faintly. I know, but I owe myself the truth. There was a pause, quiet and long. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them. Then James took a small envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. What's this? She asked. An offer, he said softly. I want you to stop working as a maid. I'm opening a new department at my company, a community care program that supports hospital workers, caregivers, and families who can't afford treatment. I want you to lead it. Nancy's mouth fell open slightly. Lead it, sir? I don't even have the education for that. You have something more important. You have a heart that understands people. That's something money or degrees can't buy. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said with a small smile. Let me help you the way you've helped me. Nancy covered her mouth as tears slipped down her cheeks. Thank you, sir. You don't know what this means to me. James stepped closer, his voice gentle. I think I do. For a moment their eyes met. Neither of them spoke, but something pure passed between them. Not just gratitude, but connection. Later that week, Nancy visited her mother at the hospital. Mrs. Wilson's face lit up as soon as she saw her daughter walk in. You're glowing, she said softly. What happened, my child? Nancy smiled, holding her hand. Mr. Wilson gave me a new job, Mama. Not as a maid, but something higher. He believes in me. Tears filled the older woman's eyes. God bless that man. I told you, kindness always finds its way home. Nancy nodded, squeezing her mother's hand gently. He's not like people think, Mama. He's been through so much pain, but he's learning to live again. Maybe you were sent to remind him how, her mother said with a knowing smile. That evening, James stood alone in his garden, looking at the wet grass shining under the soft light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted by the past. The rain didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean, like a new beginning. When he turned, he saw Nancy standing by the doorway, holding an umbrella. You'll catch a cold out here, she said softly. He smiled and walked toward her. Maybe I needed a little rain to feel alive again. She laughed quietly. You sound like my mother. Your mother is a wise woman. Tell her I said thank you. For what? For raising the woman who gave me back my life. Nancy's eyes glistened. She looked at him, unable to speak. The silence between them said everything words couldn't. As thunder rolled faintly in the distance, James looked up at the sky and whispered, For 5 years I thought Halloween took something from me, but now I see it gave me back something greater. Nancy smiled softly. Maybe it gave you peace. He nodded slowly. And maybe it gave me you. They stood there at the doorway, rain falling softly beyond them, the mansion glowing with the gentle light of a home reborn. Inside those walls that once knew only grief,
Laughter would soon return again, not because of money, not because of power, but because two broken souls had found healing in each other's kindness. And from that day on, every Halloween, the Whitmore mansion would shine with warmth and laughter, not as a house of pain, but a home where love was reborn through mercy. Dear viewers, this story shows that true wealth isn't money. It's the courage to be kind when no one is watching. If you felt the emotion in this story, give it a like, subscribe for more touching stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below.